how's it going? I know it's a long time since you've been introduced to me, but I'm Justin Schwartzenberger, aka Schwarty, and we are going to do two things today. We are going to take a mini deep dive into how Angular does CSS, and we are going to learn some tips and tricks on how we can start CSSing in Angular. All right, and I have a 10-minute block to present this content, so it'll be short and sweet, but we'll hopefully get through it. So Angular, out of the box, it has this nice little GIF that it provides us, and that is the emulated mode for view encapsulation. All right, and this emulated mode comes on by default, so we get it for all of our components without having to do anything. Now, what exactly does it emulate? What does that mean, right? Well, it's emulating this shadow DOM behavior for our components. So it's essentially scoping any CSS rules that we write for our components to only the templates for our component. So in this case, we have a parent component and a child component. This parent component has a div style rule to style the div in there. This emulated mode sets up this boundary between that to keep that div styling from leaking down into our child components, so none of their divs get styled, right? Click, there we go. All right, so how does it do this? Well, it does this by pre-processing style rules. So it's going to add an attribute selector to all of our style rules that we write, and then it's going to generate these surrogate IDs and put those on the HTML elements within our template. So when we have our component over here on the left, the Angular will render that, and it'll generate that output on the right, and it's going to add these surrogate IDs onto the style rule and the surrogate IDs onto all of the nested elements within our component template. You might be asking, hey, Schwarty, what about the host element? Oh, it puts a surrogate ID on that one as well. So the host element is the component, the custom element that Angular will create based off of our selector for our component. So in this case, we've got help-steps, the component that it creates for that. It'll put this surrogate ID on there. And then if we do any style rules for that host element, it will apply that attribute selector to there as well. All right, so what files are pre-processed in this process? This is going to work on any of the styles that we referenced from our component decorator for our components. So if we are using the styles metadata property, it's going to pre-process that content. And if we're using the style URLs component metadata property, then it's going to pre-process those as well. All right, so if there's more component instances, is that going to lead to more CSS if Angular is generating these surrogate IDs randomly for us, right? That's not the case. We're going to get a single set of CSS rules for our component, and then that's going to get applied to however many instances of the component that we have. So in here, Angular is going to generate our style tag, and it's just going to be one style tag for only the rules for a representation of that component. And then however many components that we end up with in our template, it's going to just apply that surrogate ID to all of those, the same surrogate ID, so that we have the mapping of the one style rule to any instances of it. All right, so that's it for the little mini deep dive. Let's start learning how we can do the Angular edition of CSSing, right? And we'll get some tips and tricks on how to kind of focus on that. So the first thing I want to start off with is think about using simple selectors, okay? We have this scoping mechanism that we got for free out of the box. So I would recommend starting with styling rules based on these element tags that we have in our component, and then work up from there in terms of complexity and rules and that sort of thing. So in our component here, you know, we can simply style the H2 tag. We can have a rule for the P tag and the LI tag, because we know that those rules are only going to be for that template content below. So I like to follow the acronym of KISS, KISS, which everybody knows. It's Keep It Simple Schwarty. Pretty sure I Googled it. I thought, let's go. All right, next tip, be mindful of global CSS. It's certainly okay to use global CSS, But you just kind of want to think about the fact that if you do, you run the risk of some unwanted coupling with your component that may hinder the portability of it to be able to use it in different places or different apps, or to put it in an Angular element and deliver it somewhere else, right? So like in this scenario here, we have a bunch of divs that have classes on them that we're using these class names. We need to know where those values come from and ensure that they get shipped if we deliver our component elsewhere. So those are some of the things that could come up. Again, it's okay to use global CSS. Just be aware of this sort of scenario, right? All right, this is probably my favorite one, and I think it's one that gets overlooked a lot of times, or we don't think about it too much, and that's make use of the host element, and we can style that, right? So again, Angular is going to generate this custom element from our component selector, and we can actually write style rules like :host to target that and apply styles to it. Now, custom elements don't have any block level styling by default, so we got to keep that in mind. We got to make sure that that's part of our rule if we want to start applying other styles to it. So in here, we have our component. We have a :host styling for that. So when Angular renders that out, we're going to get our speaker card component, and those styles from :host are going to get applied to that element. And we can even use :host-context, which is a pseudo class selector that allows us to target any instances where we have a specific class on our host element as well. So in here, we're saying, hey, if our host element has the selected class on it, then go ahead and apply this different style to it. Right? And again, we can use this host element to do all of our styling, containing, and that sort of thing. We don't have to go into our template and like immediately create a div to contain all of our content or anything like that. So less markup, more efficiency that way. All right, and the final thing I've got for you is my recommendation is to dive into CSS-grid if you haven't looked at it already. It's an amazing way to really drive all of your layout and look and feel for a particular chunk of content and keep your HTML markup really lean and minimal. And it works really, really well with Angular components, so definitely check that out. I don't have a slide for you for that because I'm going to leave that up to you to discover on your own. That's it. It's a wrap.